IPMNation.com.
Transmissions.
All right, welcome to Abstract Transmissions. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you.
No, thank you. We're really happy to have you, and Justin's just running a minute or so behind. He's going to be with us in just a moment. We're really glad to have you on the show. The last I had kind of seen you until just recently at the Yang campaign, you were running for governor for New Hampshire, and I was like, "Holy crap, this guy is awesome!" I was thrilled. So yeah, just so you know, myself and a bunch of friends of mine were very much. And to be fair, I didn't vote Democrat the entire ticket. I'm a libertarian. I voted for, fortunately, the guy who is governor now, when in the main race.
In the general, yes.
Yeah. Because I wanted to vote for you initially, but I really wasn't a fan of Van Osten.
Yeah.
I just didn't align with a lot of those things. And for me, I know that seems a little crazy, but some politics are very, very important to me, and certain really very specific ones when it comes to your approach. The aspect of cannabis was one I think is really important, that people, especially somebody with a disability who's a therapeutic cannabis patient, like I really think that there's not enough compassion when it comes to how that drug is being treated just as a whole, but also in various other aspects. So I kind of identify as libertarian, but I had really there's a lot of Democrats and stuff that I've been behind, and for example how I've seen you recently, with Andrew Yang. Very excited to see him running. He is completely an anomaly, in my opinion.
Well, I met Andrew back in January. They called and asked if I'd get a cup of coffee with them in Manchester, which I did. And then afterwards, we had a great time. I was not anticipating getting behind a candidate anytime soon. Certainly not as soon as I ended up doing it. And then they stayed in touch. So I would talk to their national people every couple weeks, and then I was doing a lot of programming with various candidates. I mounted a camera in my Subaru, and we would do kind of candidates in cars getting coffee.
That's awesome.
And we'd live stream it and do some audio. Did that with a number of candidates. We did events. I went snowmobiling with Andrew up in Bartlett. And at the end of all of this, I spent 2 days with Andrew in northern New Hampshire, and I helped put together a trip for him. And at the end of the second day, I had stayed over. They had rented a place during the 2-day trip. So he had 3 or 4 staffers, including a very heavy social media and digital presence, which I think anybody who's followed his campaign sees that he's really leveraging digital communication in a way that's giving him outsized bang for the buck in his campaign.
Absolutely.
So I saw that, and I liked him. I mean, we were both 45-year-old, first-generation Americans with 2 kids who loves math, loves data, and
it's a
win
for me too.
Right?
It's a big win for me.
Andrew and I are both proud Democrats, lifelong Democrats, but math is a nonpartisan issue, and it means that if you focus on outcomes, if your passion is in outcomes, and it means that you are willing to be intellectually curious about where ideas might take you in terms of good public policy, well, it means sometimes you're going to end in places that you might not have imagined when you created an initial hypothesis about public policy. And I loved his intellectual curiosity. He is an exceptionally intelligent person. And it means his story, his signature issue, Universal Basic Income, UBI, was really the product not of saying, I love UBI, how can I run on that?
Right.
It was more like, holy crap, there's some big problems in the country.
That this could be potential
and like,
winner.
how are we going to fix it?
Mm-hmm.
And it kept coming up. He started with the end and worked back to the means, not the other way around.
Right.
And so for him, he tells it this way. He says, after spending years running Venture for America, which took entrepreneurs, particularly in the Midwest and the South, where the economy has had some tough times, and finding young talent that would go into difficult places like Birmingham, New Orleans, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Louisville. Right now, venture capital will go into a hot business in Birmingham, and they'll say, we have venture capital to grow your business, and we're glad to do it on one condition. You move to Silicon Valley, you move to the 128 belt in Boston, you move to Chicago, and leave Birmingham. And so these the gap between the winning and the losing economies is growing, and he realized this was making it worse. So then he sees Donald Trump win in 2016, and he goes, okay, why? And he went back and spent time talking in these industrial Midwest states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri, all states Donald Trump needed to win, and that he did win.
Yeah.
And he basically said, why did this happen? And he basically comes down to this. Donald Trump was the wrong answer to the right question. He was asking the right question. How come the economy, people tell us, is humming along? Low unemployment, low inflation, growing GDP, and yet for the majority of Americans, regardless of party, it feels like things are not going so well, or that they're kind of one disaster away from total ruin.
Completely.
So why is this happening? Donald Trump said, basically, look, it's the immigrants, and it's and we got to turn back the clock on technology and automation. We got to go back to coal, for example.
That's insane. It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
It's insane.
It's not going to happen. I mean, the crazy thing is, we manufacture more stuff than ever in this country.
Yep.
We just need fewer people to do it.
Right.
So it's not even a matter of are you pro-manufacturing? Everybody's pro-manufacturing.
Right.
It's just the technology is driving us towards more productivity per person, fewer people needed to manufacture more goods.
It's like we can be for it, doesn't mean the companies are. And the companies are going for progression, and it makes sense. Technological progression is going to be important.
It's their job. I mean, the thing is, like when Amazon pays no federal income tax, Google, Facebook, it is generally not because they're breaking the law.
Right.
It is because they're following the law.
They're positioned well because of the law.
and their antiquated means of structuring how we measure wealth, how we capture some form of taxation in order to pay for some. We can debate what the right level of social services, what the safety net should be, and so forth. But no matter what amount of it a conservative or a liberal thinks there should be,
sure,
you want to fund it in that level in a sustainable way that encourages economic growth and which is difficult to avoid or circumvent, because then it means that the people who cannot circumvent the tax system end up having to disproportionately cover what the haves are able to circumvent.
Yeah, and that's just that's a no-go. I mean, that really doesn't that does nothing for anybody. I mean, the big problem that I find with a lot of these things is how it impacts and bloats social programs. It just adds to that. You know what I mean?
And the thing is, so Andrew gets to this point and he says it's not immigration, it's automation.
Yep.
It's not going back to the past. It's accelerating towards the future, and it's a great political message. It's a very optimistic, futuristic, data-driven, and I would argue empathetic message. It also is the right set of policies, and he's a policy guy. So he said, okay, what are the tools? And so he ends up landing on something that has a remarkably bipartisan history, universal basic income. And it says, we are creating amazing amounts of wealth in this country. We are all shareholders in the most productive economy in the history of the world. How do we make sure that we can, in an efficient, sustainable way, allow people to get the fruit of the labor they're putting in a way that Milton Friedman, the godfather of free market economics, thought was the right idea, that Barack Obama recently praised, that Andy Stern, the longtime former president of the SEIU, is a big fan of universal basic income. It passed the United States Congress twice in 1971.
This close. It was
so
close.
It was right there. The reason it didn't become law, Nixon would have signed it.
Yeah, I know.
It passed the House, but Democrats in the Senate were holding out for a higher number.
Right.
And and afterwards, senators have said since then it was one of the worst decisions they ever made.
So in hindsight, and this is a thing that I think people are really concerned with Democrats, even when it comes to gun legislation and stuff too, is that they're always trying to kind of, let's just get a little edge and whatnot. Now, I'm a lot more warm to Democrats, and even as a libertarian, only because I've voted Democrats several times, and I align with a lot of the politics for the most part. I'm very left-leaning libertarian, but I do see that, like in the last election, where there was a lot of that type of stuff happening, which they shoot themselves in the foot. Of course, this happened a long time ago, right? But my thing is always that that the nice thing I really like about Yang is how he's unifying all of these people together. Libertarians, conservatives, Democrats, progressives. It blows my mind how especially Trump supporters. I've been actively campaigning online for him, and I've never actively campaigned for a president before.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, even with Yang, that I might not agree with completely, but for me, and why I voted Bernie last election as hard and pushed, as hard as I could without actually actively campaigning, was because I felt that they were honest. And how many people, it's just because of that. But here's somebody who's honest, who I also align a lot with politically, but I think makes a very, very good point about the automation. And being in the appliance industry, which now Sears is gone, and my old job at Lowe's is you walk into a Lowe's and you can almost never find somebody in the appliance department. It's not because of their fault, because they're just downgrading the amount of people. And then at Home Depot, they've gone to a kiosk to decrease the amount of specialists, because they move people around so much that when you get there, when I used to train people for Samsung, it would blow my mind. I'd go into that department and I'd ask where so-and-so is, and they go, well, I'm here now, and they're in paint. And I go, well, where'd you come from? Paint. Well, why didn't you just stay in this very specialist department? People need to know appliances, So long story short, that Home Depot's gone automation too, and they're eventually going to go completely automation. They're going to eliminate all of that position, because it's easier to sell appliances online. And other than the mom and pop stores from which I used to work at, Barron's, or anybody who is a local independent, because they sell the high-end stuff, they might still have it. But that's still a big hit to the job market, and that's just appliances.
And what we've seen happen in manufacturing, Andrew talks about it, in the last 20 to 30 years, we've seen a net loss of 4 million manufacturing jobs in that industrial Midwest state, the blue wall that Democrats would always talk about. Well, what has happened in manufacturing is in various forms of happening as well. In retail, 30% of malls set to close in the United States in the next 4 years. 30%. The median retail employee in America, the most common job in America is in retail. A retail employee is a 39-year-old woman making between $9.50 and $10 an hour. That is the median retail worker in America. And that person has a high school degree. That is the median person. What is that person going to do as you see boarded up storefronts, and we see 30% of malls closing in the next 4 years? Food service. My older daughter, who's about to turn 16.
That's going too.
Gone. Go to McDonald's.
People are like, no, it can't happen. I'm like, oh, yes, it can.
It's happening now.
Here's a couple of YouTube videos.
Right? So you go to McDonald's, and by the end of 2020, every McDonald's in the United States and Canada will have one of those 6-foot-high touchscreens.
The kiosks.
You got it. So right now, my daughter, Abby, she starts there about 4 months ago, the one in Greenland, New Hampshire. She gets a half hour of training, and they go, you're ready to go. You're ready to work. So they take her to the register. Half hour. Oh they take her to the register, and she's thinking, all right, I'm going to be working the register. And then they walk by the register, and they walk to the giant touchscreen. They go, here's what you're doing. You are going to be, when people walking in, you're going to take their order, touch the touchscreen for them. Basically, you're going to act as their finger. They're going to tell you, I want a Big Mac, I want a fry.
So you're going to walk the old people through the kiosk.
You're going to do all the touching. You're like, so would you like one hamburger? And do it all.
But you've got to babysit this person through that.
Totally.
That's what the job is. So they're going to put one person in response of that until people can catch on to it slowly.
And they figure by early 2021... Even older couples and all, they'll be like, fine, we got it now.
Second nature at that point.
18 months of exposure, and it will save them so much money, it's a no-brainer. So my daughter, Abby, comes home, and by then I was with Andrew, and she goes, Dad, Yang knows what he's talking about. My job's going to be gone in 2021. And it's true. But here's the thing.
Check it out. That's so sad.
The thing is, it's not a 16-year-old picking up some money to pay for their gas and car insurance. Yeah. She's working with adults for whom this is one of probably multiple jobs.
One of my closest friends' mother is, she's got, I think, in her late 50s, and she's working at McDonald's, been there for a long time. She's awesome at her job, but she won't even allow a higher raise. Because she's just so like, oh no, she's such a good person, but she's just so like stuck to I'm doing my job, I don't want to do these other things, and she will take on the more responsibility without taking on the money, and there's people like that, and it's like, no, she deserves $20 an hour, and I have a friend of mine who's like, no one in that position. I'm like, no, okay, I understand why some people are saying maybe the younger people that are starting out in jobs, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I understand where they're going, but there's no way that woman who bleeds for that frigging company that's going to automate her job away, they don't care about her. I'm sorry, it makes me a little upset because she's a really good person.
Well, this is happening in retail, restaurant.
It's just McDonald's,
but it's millions and millions of jobs and
lives
and
families
and their families. Now we're talking about trucking. In 29 states, the number one job is truck driver. There are several million truck drivers in those states. Autonomous vehicles are set within a decade to take many of those jobs away. The median truck driver is a 49-year-old male, 94% male, with a high school degree, making about $53,000 a year. It is a good living in that it's a solid income, but it is hard work. But they are estimating in Silicon Valley that if they can fully automate truck drivers, and they think they can, it'll save about $168 billion with a B, $1 billion a year of productivity gains because of when a person drives a semi, they can only drive 14 hours a day by law.
Right.
Fatigue.
Right. I mean, that's still
big time.
Rough
big
thing,
time. Big hard job. Robot. Autonomous vehicle, 0 rest required, 24 hours a day.
No health needs, no diabetes, no problems, no nothing.
Accidents will go down. Mm-hmm. In fact, Andrew's seen the research. If we went to fully autonomous vehicles, we would probably save about 4,000 American lives a year because that's about how many auto deaths are caused in accidents involving a big rig.
Right.
So this is going to happen. The United States Postal Service is already doing this.
It's funny you said that. I haven't been messing around on my phone.
Oh, sure,
I had this thing pulled up here, which was just a list of of things because I've been campaigning, I've been online, saying here's a YouTube video, and just a list to kind of keep going: pizza robots, food robots, salad making robots, cafe robots, robot luggage, burger bot. Radiology, robotic surgeons that are not just operated, but fully autonomous robotic surgeons and doctors that are completely analyzing and handling the whole thing.
This is not just blue collar.
This is nuts.
This is white collar jobs.
That's right.
This is entry level legal work where a lot of it is document prepreration and word search and all. Automated.
Even robo-lawyers.
Robo-lawyers, right?
Psychologists, dude. I'm still,
accounting, radiologists who can find tumors in an X-ray photo better than humans can.
That's exactly it.
This is where it's going.
Robot nurse too.
44% of
roofing.
Jobs, right?
Roofing,
which will get us in a second to some jobs that you will not be able to automate away.
Yep.
44% of American jobs are seen as either repetitive manual or repetitive cognitive. There are things that can either be done because of patterns, the cognitive, a lot of basic accounting and legal functions, and the manual, almost the manufacturing, for example, autonomous driving and so forth. So then we get to, in a place that we talked a little about this before the taping began, and Andrew talks a lot about this. It's a little provocative, but it's not once you actually put the context in. Going to a 4-year on-campus college experience is not for everybody.
Right.
And in the meantime, over the course of our lifetimes, Andrew and I are the same age. Over the course of our lifetimes, we have seen that if you go to a 4-year on-campus experience, you are considered successful, and if you do not, you are somehow not successful. Meanwhile, I ask people, if you have a clogged pipe, if you have an electrical short, if you have a hole in your roof, if you need to apply sheetrock to replace, you're putting an addition on your house, if you're doing any of those jobs, call the plumber.
Right.
And then ask him 2 questions. How long is it going to take before you have somebody freed up? And how much is it going to be an hour?
Right.
And then you tell me who the success is.
Right. That's absolutely right.
My dad retired about a week and a half ago. He's 74, 8th grade education, immigrant from Quebec. And unbelievable carpenter, sheetrocker, electrician, foundation, roof. He did it all.
Yeah. Self-employed
for a long time, and then he worked at St. Anselm in their construction and maintenance department for the last 20 or so years of his professional life. His buddies, who are now all retired as well, their kids that are like me, 40-something, and now their grandkids, they're 20 and starting to enter the world of work. They got grandkids in their early 20s, making 65, 75 grand a year. They're going to be making 100 grand a year before they're 30 years old, doing sheetrock, doing carpentry, doing electrical. Unbelievable shortage. The reason my dad was working at St. A's until age 74, he's really good. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
I'm a little biased, right?
Yeah.
But they couldn't find young people to replace him.
Right.
And so
everybody's told to go to college.
We've demonized, quote, dirty work.
Yeah.
And yet it is the last kind of work that can be automated.
Right.
So we have this incredible shortage. And this is part of why we layer people with crazy debt. Because we basically just urge people who do not have the passion and the trajectory that where a 4-year college is the right move. They don't need to do that to be successful.
Right.
But we say, go do it anyway.
I know.
And then they leave with $50,000 and plus in student debt.
They're like, where are the jobs?
And now they don't have the job that matches what they were studying. Right. So, we need to be honest about that. And I do feel like as Democrats, sometimes it's kind of like Nixon going to China. When Democrats can talk honestly and say, let's evaluate the data about where the jobs of tomorrow are and where they're probably not.
Right.
And what kind of skills are going to be needed. And let's think about how we don't just say everybody that goes to school gets free college. Let's evaluate folks that go for certain professions where there are great disparities between the supply and demand, where we need to encourage more people to flood the zone because the demand outstrips supply. Then you can be really smart with resources to be able to deal with the supply demand. And then let's do things like the trade schools and community college, which is the path for those jobs that are open and are not going to get automated away.
To reinforce.
Let's put dollars into that and really encourage young, and then at the earliest ages, let's reverse the communication about what the definition of success is.
Yeah.
And Andrew talks about this in candid, data-driven, thoughtful ways, not provocative, not hateful. He spends very little time talking about Donald Trump. He does not like Donald Trump. He completely disapproves of most of what he's doing as president. He shares that view that the other candidates generally do that are running for president. But he probably spends as little time talking about what is wrong in a personalized way, and spends most of his time talking about. Most of his time is spent about saying, "Here are the solutions based on the homework." And I want to help lead us there.
And he really has done the homework. The thing that blows my mind is how very articulate and planned out this whole thing has been from a perspective from somebody who's not a politician. He's really looked at this, mapped it out, and been like, I think I could win this. And he's looking at it purely from a like a metrics standpoint, which I think is amazing, because that's how people run businesses. That's what people wanted with Donald Trump, but that's not what they got. And that's why I think when people say that they look at him and they see what they wanted out of Donald Trump, it's not that they wanted some bigot jerk or that's bolstering everything. What they wanted was somebody who could really fix the problems and that had a plan. And really, he's looked at it from a very well thought out perspective, and I really, for me, that makes a really big difference, and I think it's huge. Really, in general, as a voter, but even somebody who's working a campaign, to try to campaign for him.
Yeah.
It makes it very easy to bring people on board.
Out of all the campaigns I saw before I walked in on Andrew, he had by far the most diverse ideological attraction. I did an interview with him in Plymouth at a restaurant that C-SPAN ended up covering. So it's online. It's on C-SPAN's website.
Awesome. Write that down.
Hour and a half. Actually. It was an hour and a half conference. I was not with the campaign yet at that point, so it was pretty fun. It was
that's awesome.
Me doing events. It was the next day that we went snowmobiling together in Bartlett. So we were still getting to know each other, and we basically talked about the book for about 45 minutes, and then we went to the audience for another 45 minutes. And on the national, kind of the Yang Gang, the Twitter and Facebook, there's a lot of folks who will say, when I want to try to convince my friends, show them why I'm so into Yang, one of the interviews they'll show them is the Plymouth interview.
Yeah.
And which I take great pride in. It was sophisticated. It was casual. We just rapped. And we had a very good audience, and there were Trump voters, Bernie voters, Hillary voters, Gary Johnson voters. I mean, there were, there were people that did not vote.
Yeah.
In 2016. There were people of color. There were old and young people. I mean, New Hampshire's not a terribly diverse state in that regard. But to the extent that I am always impressed at his events. It is the most diverse set, ethnically, racially, definitely ideologically, and I'll ask people, because we were campaigning last Thursday and Friday. We were in Newmarket last Thursday. Julian Castro, a fine candidate in his own right. I'm not trying to diss him. Sure. He had been at Crack Skulls in Newmarket several weeks earlier, and they, had a middle of the day, whatever, modest audience.
Sure.
And we didn't know what to expect at 3 p.m. on a 55-degree rainy Thursday afternoon.
Right.
But he got there earlier than we thought, so we did a last-minute add-on event. Let's take a shot. Out the door. I mean, completely full.
That's
3 to 4 times what the Castro event brought in.
Great.
We didn't put a dime of Facebook advertising into it.
It was all by word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
I knew about it. My cousin Jay, who's also campaigning, he came with us to the one in Portsmouth there.
Yes,
and,
yes.
And he's been 100% on board since that. And now he went to that. He told me, he was like, I couldn't believe how busy it was.
It was awesome. Zoo, and
that's so great. That's early indication. I'm telling you.
I agree. And in the polling, 6th place in California, 6th place in Nevada, 6th place in South. I'll be in South Carolina with them this Thursday through Saturday.
Look at my Facebook. I'm like,
oh yeah, and he has by far the lowest name ID of anybody in the top 12 or so, but he's beating or with Beto. He's ahead of Klobuchar regularly. He's with Booker. They're the 5 names that keep coming up. Right. Usually it's
I expected them to be higher than they were at this point, and I'm not disappointed, I guess. Just because they're not somebody. It was, for me, I was really kind of at first I was behind Tulsi, because I really like Tulsi's stance on policy abroad. But and I always liked Bernie, and I'm just like, well, if that goes direction, I might go, but I'm not super head over heels with this policy. But then Yang came along, Yang Gang.
and it's a very passionate
just,
group.
All about it. Yeah, because it is. And there's a lot to be said. There's a lot to get passionate about.
Oh, yeah.
And my goal initially when I went down there was to try to talk to Andrew about trying to get him on the podcast and stuff, because we're new. We're starting out. We're still very in the beginning processes. We're the small entrepreneur. And because this type of conversation was really, really important. I didn't bring up earlier in the conversation introduction. I don't always do that at the beginning of abstract transmissions, but we are interviewing today Steve Marchand. Marchand. Yeah. And he is actively campaigning for Andrew Yang. So this is part of the show where we take a quick commercial break, just that we've got that comes on, and then we'll be right back with you folks in just a second. As a lifelong fan of Stephen King and The Dark Tower, I want to tell you about Kotet19.net. Kotet19 isn't just t-shirts with some cliche Pennywise screen print. This stuff is made with the aspiration to create not only great apparel inspired by Stephen King and The Dark Tower, but also a lifestyle branded sense of community.
Content 19 is the go-to shop for die-hard constant readers of Stephen King, but also a great gift for that bibliophile in the family. These guys always deliver the very best quality products. You can't beat these prices and with these styles and designs. If you go on, use the coupon code Abstract Transmissions and you'll receive 15% off your next full order. Again, that's content19.net. Thanks again.
And we are back with Steve Marchand, and Justin's with us now, and we are kind of pick up where we were talking briefly about Andrew Yang. So one thing that I did say, actually, a couple of lists of questions and stuff, which I don't usually do questions. This is a back and forth thing. So
sure, yeah.
But this is some of the stuff that I ultimately wanted to run. I'm running by Yang, and questions I always like to get everybody's perspective on this stuff. So the one thing that I think is going to drive at least libertarian voters is the sense and for me, being a libertarian voter, the thing I really liked about also somebody who is now in the Byzantine conduit of disability and all of that, the mess that is social programs. It's tough for a lot of libertarians to even talk about that. For me, obviously, very left-leaning in the aspect of disability and stuff, but a lot of times people struggle with how are we going to pay for it. That's not a thing for me. My concern's more how will it impact social programs. And for me, I like the idea that it's going to eliminate a lot of that, the need for any of that. But because I do think that that's a better direction, and I think that's what attracts a lot of libertarians is less government being involved in the aspect.
It's an interesting part of the drive because he is he has over 100 policies on his website, but the central piece is the universal basic income, so that tends to drive the Q&A and all this sort of thing. And that is what drives libertarian all the way to liberal appeal. One thing I like about Andrew is he doesn't give a different answer depending on the room he's in.
Right.
Sometimes other issues will come up that otherwise wouldn't, and so you get to learn different things about how he sees the world, but they're consistent. One way to look at it, one of the most common social programs is TANF, T-A-N-F, Temporary Aid for Needy Families. But the thing is, like I was saying earlier, regardless of whether you're somebody that's more liberal like me, or more conservative, or just libertarian, anywhere in the spectrum, wherever you think it is, you want sustainable ways to fund it that are predictable, that have the least distortive effects on the economy, that are not easy to circumvent, and that achieve whatever the stated goal is in an efficient way.
Yeah.
So take TANF. In some states like Texas, only about 4%, that's 4, not 40, 4% of households that are eligible for TANF actually get the TANF benefit.
Wow.
And there's a ton of reasons for it. Some of it is because when you ask people that are often in a pretty difficult situation to explore their eligibility, they will not get there. They may not have access. They're not going to go down to the local office. They don't know that they're eligible. Yep. They may have checked it out and found out they were ineligible at the moment they checked, and then later, say somebody in the family lost their job and they fell into eligibility, but they don't know where the line was, and they kind of bounce in and out.
Right.
Another reason is when we ask people to go to the benefit, you're putting barriers up. And in a lot of states, and not to pick on Texas, but Texas takes pride in making it difficult. So there are some states that are much more proactive about getting the information out to households. You may qualify based if you meet this set of criteria. Other states, Texas being one of them, tries to make it very difficult. You have to really go look for it. And then there's this other element. There's a stigma attached to many social programs, welfare programs. And, my family in the early 90s, my dad's a carpenter, we mentioned earlier in the program, 8th grade education, retired last week at the age of 74 as a carpenter. Guy has just an unreal motor, unreal work ethic. Yeah. Built a house in 1990 when the recession was the worst one of my lifetime here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And,
what a time to do it.
And he got stuck with a house that he couldn't sell. because all the banks went under, so nobody could get a mortgage. Kept dropping the price, couldn't sell it. We had to start paying back the loans, to borrow the money to build the house. And we had our own mortgage. I was trying to be the first kid to graduate high school and go on to college, in my case. No income, new bills. We drop our insurance. A couple months after we do, my mom at 39 years old has a heart attack, $80,000 medical bill at Catholic Medical Center, 3 calls every day from collection agencies saying, if you're not a deadbeat, you pay the bill. And finally, my parents filed bankruptcy, and, I've been there. And never, ever, ever did my folks apply for or accept any of the sort of safety net programs that would kind of scream, this is an appropriate time to seek the benefit.
Absolutely.
And if you ask them, they'll tell you it's because they would say, Norm and Sue Marchand, we don't need we don't do welfare.
Yep.
It's a pride thing. On one level, I have amazing admiration, right? On one level, how can you not sort of admire that there's a toughness to it?
Yeah. On
the other hand, that's why it's there.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's a tough thing. I literally just went through it. It's crushing because here I pushed myself as hard as I possibly could at that job, and not going farther into the reason why, but I lost it because of a disability, because of issues with attendance with a disability, and unfortunately, circumstances happen. I am now in a position where I need to go be on disability, and because of pain flare-ups and these things. Long story short, some listeners know, some don't. The big thing for me, though, is that having to navigate things like welfare and all that stuff in the interim is a nightmare. It's incredibly easy. So both sides of it, right? It's incredibly difficult to deal with. It's hard to navigate all these things. It's soul crushing because you don't want to admit to yourself that you have to do it. You don't want to have to do it. And the pride thing, that was.
So there are all these barriers. So when you look at it, there's it's not just, in my opinion and Andrew's opinion, fairer. It's more efficient. And it basically says, let's begin with the wealthiest country in the history of the world, a country that has added $5 trillion of wealth in the last decade or so. But we are seeing an incredible lack of ability to see that wealth distributed through labor. There has been, through most of history of the country, a pretty direct relationship between increased productivity of the workforce, technological revolution of the past, and increased wages, as well as increased employment.
Yeah.
And what we're finding now is there's a detachment over the last 40 years that has accelerated. That as technology has accelerated, we are seeing a lower and lower percentage workforce participation rate. Right. When you see the unemployment rate at 3.6%, the lowest since the late 1960s, 2.3% in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
We also have to look at the numerator and the denominator. And we have a lower percentage of working age Americans that are actually in the workforce or seeking to be in the workforce than we have in several generations.
Right, because it's not just the employment rate, it's also the participation rate. But you're also factoring in there's a lot of people in positions that, like we discussed, with people who aren't in the workforce in general, that stay at home and take care of kids.
I mean, and
battle with that.
UBI kind of said, right now, because we measure through gross domestic product and the unemployment rate and overall inflation, Andrew's wife, they have 2 kids, aged 6 and 3. One of their kids is autistic. Amazing mom, amazing partner, and she is working her butt off.
Right.
Right now, the way we measure GDP, we measure her contribution to the economic well-being of the country at 0.
Right. That's crazy.
And that's crazy. I mean,
right.
When we have households where one parent stays at home to care for the kids, that is part of what empowers the other parent to be able to go out and do the more
100%.
Traditional forms of how we measure growth and wealth. It's real work. And by the way, when a parent does the hard work of parenting, we also end up increasing the well-being, the health outcomes of that child, the educational outcomes. We see lower crime rates. We see higher home ownership. I mean, all the things that we say we want more of, or we want better numbers in, quality of life measures, that's real economic output that Andrew's wife Evelyn is putting into the economy. Universal basic income is one of the ways that we say we value your work.
Right.
And we see that the ways we focus so much on the minimum wage. and if we're not careful, and we don't think of this in the big macro way, and we just focus on the minimum wage, then we're going to be treating a symptom and not the disease.
Right. And I think that's the problem with Sanders, is that he's looking at it solely as we just need to, put these things in place. And but yeah, that's not going to necessarily solve a lot of problems. It's going to solve some very minimal problems. People will still be almost living just barely out of poverty, at the minimum wage for a lot of people. Like there's a lot of non-solving problems with that. I think that the freedom dividend becomes a lot better and it's not just traditional UBI too. That's the other thing. It's vastly different in the aspect that we're looking at it from a completely different stance. But he also makes a point that he doesn't. I mean, obviously certain things have to be dealt with Congress and whatnot. It makes sense, but unless you're Donald Trump, then you just do whatever the fuck you want. Excuse my language. I don't have to. No FCC ratings here. The thing that bothers me the most is that aspect of him as a president. But it also, in a tangent, is the nice thing that Andrew's looking at is like, I can change how we're rating these people, and I don't need to involve Congress to do it. We can change the scorecard from the GDP to a better way for humanity as a whole.
I mean, he says it. When you wake up in the morning,
he's like, look,
when you wake up in the morning, you're like, GDP's up by 0.2%.
I mean, shit for me.
Boy, what a great day. Like it's disconnected from, why are we here? We're here to improve the quality of life for ourselves, our families, the people we love.
That's an existential question, too. And that you got to really ask that for some people who wake up, especially somebody like me. I wake up and it's just like, I'm doing the podcast thing, and I have music, and I have my son, and my life is obviously not at the end, but it sucks to feel like everything was going one way into another. So to feel like that American that, Donald Trump certainly doesn't give a shit about, but for me, I really think that, the promising thing, and obviously people always get hope about a president and nominees and stuff, but what I like is that here's somebody who has a lot of energy that I feel like definitely wants to change things, but not for a political reason. I think the only reason, and this is just my opinion, you know him better than I do, You'd be able to tell me, but I feel like it's not even that he really necessarily wants to do it, but he feels like he has to.
He did not wake up in...
he wants to save his kids and his family from an apocalyptic future.
Absolutely.
Which is exactly what's on the bend. And
which nobody else is talking about in the way that he is. And so it's a very mission-driven candidacy, which becomes very clear when you spend time with him or you watch him for a while. It's what frees him up, and I think you may get peeks into this in the debates starting next week, is, look, I respect anybody who's running for office. I've done it. If you've run for a major office, you're giving up a lot. You're giving up... you're not making money. I can tell you that. You are definitely spending money because it's leaking out of your life. It's more gas in the gas tank. It's more food out. It's more babysitting because you're not home. It's very painful. Anybody who would run any party, you got my respect right off the top, and I know Andrew feels the same way. So here's the thing. I don't know if folks have been, watching the news lately, like the last, say, 3 to 4 years. The idea that the best way to contrast against Donald Trump and to defeat Donald Trump is by having a Democratic nominee who's going to begin their sentences like this. Okay, so when I was in the Senate, I fought for this bill, and people are going to be like,
their eyes roll back.
I don't want to go back. Like going back, it's because of back that I voted for Trump. Yeah. I want to go forward. I want to know what's the next 20 years of America going to be like. Give it to me straight. I don't have to agree with you on everything. But I want to know that you have your act together, that you've done the homework, that you're just going to give it to me straight, that you have a work ethic that doesn't stop, that you're in it for the right reasons. And I think Andrew is one of only 2 of 24 candidates who has never held public office. Marianne Williamson's the other.
Right.
That is going to be the kind of profile that is going to contrast best. I think Andrew can say, listen, you thought you were voting for an outsider businessman who was going to identify the big questions and provide the right answers. Right. Well, I'm a successful businessman. I've actually started business from scratch in a traditional way. And am I worth billions? No. Have I done really well?
He doesn't lose billions.
Right.
Over a 10 years.
He also has never filed bankruptcy, 7
I know
times.
you guys
or
aren't into
whatever.
smearing him, but I can.
Right. I mean, so he's like, I know what it's like to be successful in the private sector, and I'm a first-generation American who understands the positive power of immigration to improve our economy, to strengthen entrepreneurship. Immigrants are the most entrepreneurial people in our society because when you come to this country, I saw it in my own parents' lives.
What our entire country's founded on.
It's hard.
Also,
you got to learn the language.
Yeah.
You have to play the game. You have to learn the game. You have to build community, build a family, start a business. If you want to eat, you eat what you catch.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a disproportionate entrepreneurship in the immigrant community.
That's right.
Which is very exciting. I just love it. He can tell that story in a firsthand way. He can talk about technology. I would love to have somebody who's 30 years younger than Trump standing on a stage next to him.
Yeah.
That can talk about, right? Talk about your data. Your data. I mean, he says this. Think about Facebook. Facebook pays zero
on your
federal taxes. And they're making money off of the three of us because they're using our personal data to make money.
You see nothing on that.
And that's part of the freedom dividend.
Right.
Is why do they get to profit off of some of the most personal information that we have, and then they don't even pay taxes that go back to helping build our communities, and instead force us to either go without or to raise state and local property taxes. We have to compensate for that.
So here's our solution, all you libertarian listeners out there. People are very, and this is the thing, because I get a lot from libertarians, and I'm a libertarian, so I'm on board with them, my buddies, but they're always worried about how you're going to pay for it, how you're going to pay for it. Well, if you're making because my whole thing has been tax robot labor. That's my hashtag tax robot labor, because I believe in that, because it's laborless robot labor. Just ask Asimov, ladies and gentlemen. My thing is that there's listless labor. This is not going to cost anybody anything, and these companies are benefiting from it. Okay, yep, it's their robots. So I understand Amazon owns the robots, and we're taxing them, and it's a big no-no for libertarians. But I think this is a perfect example. Facebook's using our personal information, and we see nothing from it. That's not us taking from another company. That's us getting our money back. Also, we get income tax by the Fed, that they like to earn the Fed. I agree in a lot of ways. We have a bloated dollar, and there's a lot of things, but the Fed takes a lot out of all of us, and we see none of that back. If anything, we pay more at the end of the year. Wouldn't it be nice if we were getting some of that money that we pay in back, maybe negative?
And this is part of why he favors a value-added tax. And there are some people on there are some of my libertarian friends that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And there are some of my liberal friends that are uncomfortable. But
I'm not.
But here's the thing. Every Western economy, Asia, Western Europe, Canada, has some form of value-added tax. And because, unlike our current corporate tax system, you pretty much cannot evade paying taxes on income that you make at the corporate level. So, taxing robot labor, that is in effect what the value-added tax does. It has a small tax at every point of transaction and production all along the way. It's embedded in the final price that consumers pay. Now, some liberals get upset about that because they say it will increase, passing it on to everybody, including those in the lower end of the income scale. Doing all the research, there's no question that even at the lowest income level, because of the freedom dividend, lower income Americans come out ahead on the transaction. It is people on the upper end of the income scale who consume far more in absolute terms than people on the lower end. That's pretty straightforward. They will pay a much higher amount as consumers, but the $1,000 a month has less of a direct impact on the higher income person, as you can imagine, than it does on the lower income household.
Huge.
So the value-added tax, which would pay for roughly half of the freedom dividend, is a way at basically getting at robot labor. Yep. Much of the rest of
That's why I used that thing, because I felt like it was just when I worked at Samsung, it was always like, how do you get something from one person's brain to another the easiest? And so if you can make something simplified like that, it makes them think, and then they have to dig in more to find out what's that mean. And so,
but by then you
maybe
got
it'll
them,
catch on.
right?
Who knows?
Right?
That's what I'm hoping.
And much of the rest of it, by the way, isn't with additional taxes. It's increased economic activity, because we know that the overwhelming majority of the freedom dividend will get spent in the local community.
So it's exponential. It's just going to feed back into
There's
itself.
an 8-to-1, and this is not, and some people worry about inflation. Keep in mind, for better or worse, in the 2009 bailout, $4 trillion in quantitative easing was put into the economy and had virtually no impact on inflation. This is a much smaller amount of money than that. And it's not new money. This is not the printing of new money. This is wealth that is getting created.
Oh, right. And no one was screaming.
It's simply being taxed.
Yeah.
It's not being taxed right now. I remind everybody, Facebook, Google, Amazon, we're not paying federal taxes right now.
I do think that that's going to be the easier sell for a lot of people, at least on the conservative side. I'll say the conservative side, because I think even the libertarians can see they don't like the word tax, but we live in a society that exists with tax. Nobody's going to end the Fed tomorrow, although a lot of people want that. That's not realistic, but I do think what is realistic is something like this, in which you can eliminate a lot of social spending and stuff to just help people more at the bottom level and really inject that money into the base foundation of society, right? We're pumping all of this to the lower level.
A local dollar that is spent locally has a roughly 8-to-1 ripple effect as compared to a dollar that is spent outside of your community.
That makes total
sense. It keeps going around.
Right, because it's getting, there's a profit every time it moves up the ladder to the next business, to the
and
next
then they
business.
spend it, and they spend it. So it creates economic activity.
It's basic economics, too, which I find is really frustrating when arguing with people about the whole, it's socialism. It's definitely not that, because I know what socialism is, and we're not buying Victory brand cigarettes, so.
No, this is a I really...
It is. It's capitalism first.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, humanity first, capital. What time are we at?
It's about 5:50, so I will say for the listeners, right out of here, I'll be heading to Hopkinton, where we've got an event. I'm doing a lot of surrogate work for Andrew. I can speak for virtually all presidential campaigns where we all wish that our candidates lived in New Hampshire and campaigned here.
Right.
But not only are there other early states like Iowa, South Carolina, Nevada, it's becoming increasingly a nationalized primary system, and it means that using digital communication, social media, podcasts like the Joe Rogan interview, which has had well over 3 million hits.
Absolutely.
The Breakfast Club, Ben Shapiro.
Yep.
I mean, you've got to go across the spectrum.
Right.
He's getting millions of hits.
Dave Rubin. I mean, he's really getting a lot of good...
Freakonomics.
Dude, I will say that Shapiro was really... I couldn't believe that went the way it did. It was great.
Yeah.
That went really well.
It's bold.
Shapiro. Shapiro's not an easy guy to interview with.
Not at all.
Yang did a great job.
And then he's going to be... And then we take it to the other end of the spectrum. He's going to be on The View next week.
Yeah.
So we're going from Ben Shapiro and Joe Rogan to The View. Whoopi Goldberg to Joe Rogan, okay?
Yeah, that's
so, but we got to hit everybody, and this is how people are consuming media. This is how they're consuming information. So we're lucky. He spends a lot of time in Iowa and New Hampshire. I'll be with him at this weekend in South Carolina for some big politics down there. But it's become nationalized, so it means that folks like me are doing surrogate work.
That's what I was saying to Christina. Actually, I'm like, because I know he's coming up in August. We're trying to get him on or whatever, but by that time, things are getting so busy. So it was like.
It's
hopefully
crazy.
We'll have him on here by that time, and we thank you for coming on. And
thank you guys.
And it was great to have you, and hopefully we'll see you again here soon.
That'd be great.
Get you back on and kind of discuss stuff down the road once things are moving right along. Excited to see how the direction of the debates goes. He's on the same stage with Bernie and Biden, and I can't wait for him to. He's a spit, but he's got a heck of an attitude.
He is
I'm
very
excited
funny,
for this. He's a funny guy.
On the 1992 high school national debate champion team.
Oh, was he?
Seriously.
Oh boy, this is gonna
be fun. I can't guarantee he's only going to get about 10 minutes, right? Because they have so many people.
Yeah.
But I have full confidence he will maximize the impact of that 10 to 12 minutes in a way that I don't think anybody else can. So I'm proud to be with him. I'm excited about next week.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and look forward to talking to you again soon. And safe travels out there in your trip to Hopkinton.
Off to Hopkinton. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
IPMNation.com.